So there's been a lot of noise the past couple months. And regardless of what you think about it, the reality is that we have arrived at a social reckoning and a spiritual reformation involving and confronting our own injustices, owning our mistakes, owning our complicity, and we're realizing that there's no longer a gray area between justice and injustice, and there never was. You're either on one side or the other. You're either for justice or against justice. And depending on where you find yourself in this equation, maybe you respond differently. Maybe it causes you to become fragile and defensive. Maybe it causes you to feel guilty and shameful, or maybe it causes you to feel inspired and resolute. Maybe you're listening to others more. Maybe you're having more conversations with others. Maybe you're posting more. Maybe you're learning more. Maybe you're canceling others because you're either for justice or against it. And if I'm being honest, I want to be on the side for justice. But when I see people going 100 miles an hour and I feel like I'm only going 50, it can feel like I'm not doing enough. And I get comforted when I think of Jesus because he was on the side of justice, but it seemed like he was less concerned about how fast people were moving, less concerned even about what side of the line they were on, and more concerned about the direction they were moving towards. See, Jesus was for justice, but he realized what the prophet Martin Luther King Jr. would say 2,000 years later, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So wherever people were at, it didn't matter to Jesus where they stood in the moment, but what they were moving towards. You're either for justice or against it. Zacchaeus was a man in the time of Jesus. And Zacchaeus was very much so on the side against justice, right? He was a tax collector, which meant he worked for Rome, which meant he worked for an empire that treated people harshly and unjustly. Zacchaeus' job essentially was to extract wealth from the vulnerable and transfer it to the powerful. And he wasn't even a Roman, he was a Jew. So you can just picture him putting his head down and thinking, if I just play the game right, I can get a little taste of power. And he ended up betraying his own people, his own principles, his own culture for the sake of getting ahead and getting above. And so when Jesus comes into his town, the way he tries to interact with Jesus is the same way he's tried to interact with his work and with power, is by getting ahead and getting above. So what does he do? He runs ahead of the crowd. He climbs a tree to get above the crowd. And when Jesus sees him, he says, yo, Zacchaeus, get off of your tree and have a meal with me. In other words, get off of your system, get off of your structure, get off of your understanding, reimagine what power looks like. It's not about getting ahead and getting above, it's about getting below and maybe resting every once in a while. And so Zacchaeus and Jesus share this meal and things start to change. Zacchaeus starts to reform his mind and his lifestyle. He starts to have a reckoning, just like what we're having today, of the ways in which he's participated and co-conspired in an unjust system. And his first response is to repair what he's broken. He pays back the people that he's wronged. He essentially pays reparations. And I think Zacchaeus understood what so many of us, especially in the American church, are blind to, that if our gospel is only concerned with matters of the heart, but turns a blind eye to the things that actually bind the body, then maybe it's not the gospel. Zacchaeus understood that the kingdom of God has come to invade our personal lives, but has also come to take up some space in our world. So Zacchaeus repaired what he had broken. But Jesus doesn't stop there, right? Jesus says one more thing to the person on the other side of justice. He says one more thing to the oppressor, to the person who betrayed his people, his principles, his culture, just to profit off of an unjust system. Jesus says, salvation has come to your house, and you are still a son of Abraham. In other words, you're not too far gone. In other words, there's a second chance. In other words, I have hope for the oppressor too. Jesus reaffirms Zacchaeus' identity and invites him back into the tradition of walking humbly and loving mercy and living justly. You're either for justice or against it. Zacchaeus found himself on the side against justice, but Jesus didn't cancel him. Jesus saw the direction that he was moving, and because of this, Zacchaeus was able to reimagine power. He was able to repair what he had broken, and he was able to re-enter the good and holy tradition of being for justice.